Hello and welcome all. My name is Amanda Wolf and I am part of CSC's University Relations and Recruiting team. I am here today to introduce our webinar topic of cybersecurity with our featured speaker, Mr. Rob Carey. Before we get started on today's topic, keep in mind that we will be having a live question and answer session. Your questions can be asked on Twitter with the hashtag CSC Hangout and will be answered by our cybersecurity expert, Rob Carey. You may ask the questions throughout the entire presentation as we will answer them after the PowerPoint is completed. We are excited to have you all here today. I would now like to introduce you to Nicole Tomlin, who is CSC's Senior Manager of Talent Acquisition and University Relations.
Hello, everyone. Thanks, Amanda. My name is Nicole Tomlin, as Amanda just mentioned, and I oversee university recruiting. We're excited for this session. CSC is really getting more into the university space, and we're going to bring more sessions like this to expose you to our organization more. And so Rob has graciously agreed to do this webinar, so ask a lot of questions. I'm on Twitter, and we'll get your questions answered. And don't be scared, because we got to test Rob out a little bit. All right, Amanda.
All right, and without further ado, I would now like to introduce our featured speaker, Mr. Rob Carey. Rob Carey holds the position of Vice President for CSC's Global Cybersecurity. He is responsible for developing and delivering cybersecurity offerings and managed security services for the public sector. Before CSC, Rob worked for the Department of Defense for over 31 years, helping to protect our nation. Mr. Carey holds a bachelor's degree in engineering from the University of South Carolina and a master's of engineering management from George Washington University. Rob is also retired from the United States Navy Reserve. With that, we welcome Rob and our presentation on cybersecurity.
Thanks, Amanda. Thanks, Nicole. Welcome, everybody. I'm very excited to talk virtually to an oversized class of a couple hundred students out there on a topic that I'm very passionate about, which is cyber, and why I think it's important that you all engage in this space. It is a problem that needs solving now, and it's a problem that I foresee will need solving for the foreseeable future. And what I mean by that is, you know, as I studied the problems of what do college kids learn today, and I have a daughter who's a sophomore in college, the jobs that she will apply for exist today. In 3 or 4 or 5 years, some of those jobs will be around, some of those jobs will not be around. This job of cybersecurity will be around. So I encourage you all to ask questions. Don't be afraid to ask hard questions. If I don't know, I will say that. I have built some slides which are really aimed at stimulating conversation with you all and hopefully prompting you to think and ask questions about cyber in the commercial space and cyber in the U.S. federal space. Some of you international students, I think, will benefit as well. The United States government is pretty good at cybersecurity, mostly because they've been told to by the Congress. At the same time, it is a cost of doing business in the information age. So you all need to understand, as you pursue this endeavor, this is a challenge that beholds the internet generation right now. So with that, Amanda, let's go to the deck, go through some slides. You guys can ask your questions along the way, and I think Nicole is going to read them back to me towards the end, and we'll be able to have a discussion about your specific questions. Okay, so I think the deck is up. Again, just a picture slide for the opening. Go ahead, Amanda, go to the second slide. What's important to know in the world stage of cyber is the magnitude of the problem and the cost of the problem. And so as you look at this slide and you see that there is not a corporate logo that hasn't been touched, there is not generally a federal agency that hasn't been touched. These data that are here, the $338 billion, are actually from last year. So you can imagine these numbers are larger, and this is the largest transfer of wealth in history, and it occurs behind the scenes. Most of these organizations found out about the cyber attack that they incurred after it occurred. The average time that it takes to discover the attack is about 8 months. So imagine looking back into your checking accounts or your debit card accounts and finding out that your money was gone 8 months ago. That would make you a little bit upset. So I point this out to just show you magnitude of the problem. And then you see some pretty important logos out there. You see Apple and Sony and Facebook, New York Times, Target, Home Depot, JP Morgan Chase, and a host of government agencies that have all been affected, and there are more. I was gathering these logos up, and I found that I could build a whole site just on the logos that have been hacked. So again, cybersecurity becomes a underlayment to the use of the internet to conduct business in the 21st century. So let's go to the next slide. So you all know Symantec, and Symantec put out some stats again last year. And interestingly enough, when you see these statistics, again, they are just dramatic in the rise of both attacks and crime. And frankly, if you're on the receiving end of a cyber attack, you don't care if it was a disgruntled high school kid or if it was a nation state attacking you, you have felt the effect. And so you see that, you know, these numbers are huge. These numbers paint a very dire picture of cyber on the world stage, on cybersecurity. Cyber defense was not thought of 20 years ago. Security was thought of to some extent. Privacy was thought of to some extent. But there was no real understanding of the ability and the ease of the ability to get into someone else's network and what would it take to keep people out. You see the FBI Director Comey's statement, you know, which he, you know, this is a quote from last fall, you know, you either have been hacked by the Chinese or you don't know that you have been, you either have or have not been, but you just don't know it. The magnitude is huge for those being attacked. And this is data that he has gathered, and the FBI does counterintelligence for the United States of America from what they're seeing. And again, it goes back to how is espionage playing out on the world stage? How is identity theft playing out on the world stage? And the most successful hackers in the world don't leave footprints. So the fact that some of the information here is the amount that has been caught, or at least observed after it occurred, there's a great deal of attacks that occur that the companies or the recipients of the attack don't know it happened. Go to the next slide. So one of the things that I uncovered when I first arrived at CSC was what was the common lexicon, what was the definition of what cybersecurity was. So I went back to my old stomping grounds, and you know, in March of 2014, we published this definition, really to get our heads around, okay, what does it mean? You know, prevent damage to, provide protection of, prevent unauthorized access to, a lot of starchy and stuffy words. But when companies go to invest in this, or organizations go to decide where would they invest, you have to decide and you have to understand what it is you're going to buy. This is like some of us going out and buying an iPhone 6, or some of us going out and buying a Galaxy, some of us buying a new car. We generally do a fair amount of research on what it is we're buying. We know what it will do, and sometimes what it won't do. In cyber, most of the leaders of the world are not cyber experts, and so you have to recognize that. And so ergo you have to define cyber in simple terms. And so I brought the DoD definition here, and then I captured terms that I thought were very useful, and link common terms that we would use as we respond to questions from other companies and other agencies. So this is application security. We talk about data security. We talk about security operations center management, things that fall into this and maybe don't fall into what you might call infrastructure or networks or what have you. Because when companies invest money or organizations invest money, government agencies, as a matter of fact, have to now identify their cybersecurity budgets, because the Congress wants to know how much is being spent on cyber. And as a matter of fact, the administration this year asked for $14 billion for cyber for FY16. That's the most ever. Last year was $13 billion. And those are public numbers. You guys can research those if you want. But again, the lexicon of what are we investing in and what are we not investing in is important so that you can understand how much do you get for the things that you're buying here. And I'll talk a little bit about that later. The other thing I wanted to mention here is there's a point in time, and we'll talk about technologies in a little bit, everything is going to be done on your mobile phone. Your generation, not mine, your generation clearly does a great deal of things on your phone. And the security around a mobile device, whether it's a tablet or a phone, is probably one of the greatest challenges that we face right now, because as you dive into clouds and dive out of clouds with just the credentials that your phone carries on it from the store, the ability of those transactions to be done securely is, depends on how smart of a challenger you have looking at you, isn't very hard to get into, isn't very hard to hack. So I mention that to you so that, again, when we talk about cyber and we talk about availability, integrity, authentication, confidentiality, non-repudiation, we talk about the information that's moving from somewhere in the cloud to your phone, right? Do you trust it? Typically, if it shows up on our phone, our tablet, or our PC, we believe everything that shows up on the screen unless it's an obvious hokey fake. So again, this definition is important to understand as you bracket where you're going to put energy and where organizations put their money. Let's go to the next slide. So I illustrated here because I'm a federal government guy, spent 30 years working there, is to sort of spread this problem a little deeper and a little broader into things that certainly the United States government deals with in cyber challenges, and literally almost everybody else. I don't think the problem is differentiated very much for big businesses, small businesses, other nation states. They deal with increased threats. One of the things that I like to tell people is the cost of doing business in the information age is your cybersecurity expense. The cost of entry into hacking is a PC, an internet connection, and probably your mom's credit card, if you will. Don't need very much to go buy tools, know some IP addresses, some rudimentary skills, and off you go, and you can cause harm. And the amount of harm that you can cause, or that anyone can cause, with a very, very small investment is great, which then tells you cyber on the recipient end is a really, really important endeavor for every company known to man, because there aren't too many companies today that don't do their business, perform their mission function on the internet. Clearly the United States government does. Clearly most national governments do. Some countries like Estonia and Georgia are almost wholly reliant on the internet to conduct functions. Ergo, the cybersecurity spend and the cybersecurity defenses that they must put in place have to be equally as important to them. One of the things that has popped up in this country, and certainly on the national stage, is insider threat. And if you people have heard the story of Edward Snowden, and I won't go into that too much detail, but suffice to say that insider threat has become a focal point because of the massive effect it can cause. Everyone on the inside is already a trusted member of the network using it to do their business in support of that organization's job or role or mission. And so when that's breached, that's really can be just absolutely harmful to that organization. Resource limitations. Not everybody has an unlimited budget to spend on this. There are benchmarks of how much each organization should and could spend on cybersecurity, and in reality, we're starting to see numbers from some international organizations and some areas like the energy sector, where they're spending more than what was quote-unquote the norm, so that they can ensure that they're doing a little bit more because the criticality of their function is requiring them to put higher protections in place. In the government, the Budget Control Act really did drive, in the federal government here, really did drive spending down. Ergo, people were trying to make do with what they had. In reality, the spending, we're finding that there's going to be a threshold by which everybody's going to have to achieve a benchmark that will provide adequate, normal cybersecurity. I don't know what that number is yet, but I don't think we've hit it yet either. Similarly, and I'll talk about this later, what do you get for what you've spent? So if you're into protecting your phone, are you downloading a semantic antivirus, Norton, or one of the other phone apps for free, and the one that costs money, do you buy it, even though it does more things for you? It's an interesting illustration of the value of cyber. The acquisition process, having been in industry a little while now and having spent a lot of time in the government, getting these tools takes a long time. The smaller organizations can go out and buy what they want and install it quickly. The larger organizations seem to struggle. And larger organizations sometimes have more at risk. And so again, the acquisition cycles of most bureaucracies are complex. And again, as you engage in this thing and you guys seek out work careers, you will find that things don't exactly always happen as fast as you want them to, that there is a process. And the process is useful, but if you have ideas when you get to your jobs about how do you accelerate the process, bring them. Transformation issues. Most organizations today, government or industry, are in some stage of changing themselves, refining their business operation, making themselves more efficient and effective. And now you're trying to come in and say you need to do the following things to your network, right, in the midst of this transformation. And it becomes very difficult because now we're playing with 8, 10, 12 moving parts, and we don't have enough money to afford all of them. So, see above the first two things or second two things I talked about, and you can see how the challenge becomes very difficult for a CISO or his team to now execute what they set out to do maybe 6 or 8 months prior. Last part I want to bring up is what we call compliance fatigue. Most agencies, the government is held to law and executive orders from the White House, standards from NIST, and there's a great number of boundary conditions that have been applied to the federal government, which actually is a good thing. It sets a bar. At the same time, in the industry, you have Starbucks and other really accounting-related standards that do drive back into what does the network do, is it repeatable, how much are you spending on it, blah, blah, blah. But compliance becomes something that you get tired of. You'll find that CISOs are staying ahead of the auditor and not necessarily driven to security, right? So there's a difference between compliant security and actual security, and I'll talk about that a little bit at the end. Again, as I said, the government's better at it because bars have been set, laws have been set, that each agency has been sort of forced to spend money and meet standards that they wouldn't have normally met otherwise. In industry, it's what the industry organization wants to spend. If an industry organization has been attacked already, we generally find that the investment suddenly becomes a little higher, and there's a little bit more sense of urgency to deliver beyond what the auditors might find. Go to the next slide. So I want to spend a few minutes on a top 10 list, and this is really aimed at getting you guys to think a little bit, to ponder topics that may interest you from a studies point of view, a problem solving point of view, or just pique your interest overall. So let me go through this, and then I only really got one more slide that I hope to again spur some thought in your heads. But the game's really changing very rapidly here for federal agencies and for companies. 10 years ago, 15 years ago, the Department of Defense rolled out Common Access Cards, so it was really a smart card with a PCAP credential on it to do cryptographic logon onto the network. And wow, was that hard, right? That was a change management initiative that had never been undertaken before. I led it for the Navy, and I rolled out the first 55,000 cards for Navy. and it was just hated and despised because it was new and it was different, and why am I doing this, and what happened to my password, and your password went away. Once you understand it, and then it took root after about, believe it or not, 4 or 5 years, it does become the fundamental to link, information from the mobile endpoint or the desktop into the cloud through an application, right? So this is a blossoming industry of how do you do that succinctly, and how do you get that done in such a way that it is seamless for the user. Today, identity credentials are not necessarily seamless, but they are absolutely essential to the future of secure computing and secure information management. The next one, application security. Heretofore, applications were built, and you all in college were taught how to code, and secure coding, when I was certainly going through operational software development for torpedoes in one of my previous lives, we had some secure coding processes, but the coders just went nuts over this takes too long, there's too many checks, this and that, the other thing, I'm not interested in this, I can't go fast, and I can't do it the way I want to do it. You're actually making me do it very much the same way. Today, you would have, and I think you'll start to be taught, that their applications must be built securely. They must be built with resiliency baked in, so that when you get out here and you're running an SAP software system that is the financial backbone for a $2 billion corporation, if that goes down, it doesn't turn out very well for a lot of people. So in reality, looking at these apps and building them with security in is the new mantra, and is something that you guys, if you're not doing it now, go ask how to get into that space and learn how to do it. Performance metrics and statistics. I put this in here because I know that when organizations buy tools to use on their networks, they cannot quantify what they got for the money. They don't know, what does the firewall do for me? What does the intrusion detection system do for me? What does two-factor authentication do for me? Each of these things in the quote-unquote security stack provide both an individual value of defense and a cumulative value of defense. And then to then measure that's really important to be able to do, because most of our bosses, and the bosses that you're going to have as you become employed the next 1 to 4 years, you will find that most of them are not cyber experts. Most of them are not IT experts. The information technology awareness and knowledge of senior leaders is growing, so that, I would imagine in 10 or 15 years, the CEOs grew up with the internet, grew up with mobile phones, and so that awareness will be there. But frankly, the consumer market and information technology used to run a company securely are two different things. And information sharing is important, but information security is basically the bread and butter of the company. Moving to what's called a managed security service is another thing, because the money is not available to buy everything that companies or organizations want. We move to a style of delivery where organizations like ours can deliver cyber on behalf of the recipient using our investments, so that all that the company that's receiving the services is doing is paying by the drink, right? They're almost renting the ability for us to perform the service for them. It drives the cost down 20 to 30% and provides the same security level to the network as if they were doing it themselves. The good thing is less money spent. The change is the change in the trust mechanism between the companies who have been engaged in this agreement. It does move the risk calculus over towards the vendor who's providing the managed security service, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. We write SLAs and do that all the day. Learning is a really, really important metric here, to be able to continue to study the problem as the problem moves. Many of you probably never even had the first edition of the iPhone or the first edition of the Galaxy. However, I remember the first edition of the BlackBerry. That's how old I am, the 957. But as you move yourself forward, and you can imagine this is like learning new operating systems in the mobile phones, you must recognize that the threats moving forward and your ability to perform minimal functions in the security space as a user, as a privileged user, as a owner, operator, what have you, all must move together in this space. It only takes one slip up of a network operator to allow one of the 10,000 attacks that day to get in and wreak havoc on you. So learning is something that is a lifelong endeavor in the cybersecurity space. Effects-based. This is a passion of mine, to be able to quantify what do you get for how much you have spent. We talk about risk management in cyber, and that's a term that is sort of the gray scale, right? How much for how much can I reduce my risk? It's not generally quantified. And in the military, we've quantified the performance of many things down to a pretty good detail. And we had to model it, and we had to do simulation, but at the same time, we understood what certain aircraft could do, what did the value of certain airplanes being able to go Mach 1.5 provide as it's conducting its operational maneuvers. And so you knew that. So you had to design an engine to go Mach 1.5. Here, we don't know what the effect of a firewall is, other than we know it keeps certain bad things out. But we've got to get to the place where we can quantify it, and then we can measure its value against that particular quantification, and then determine, is it actually doing what we want it to do? Many companies came to see me in my last job, and I would ask this question, and I wouldn't get any good answers, but I really do believe the brains out there in the modeling simulation world need to come to grips with cyber and the network, the things that are in the security stack, and determine the value propositions of these things. Mission assurance, again, another important thing to recognize. This is the cost of doing business in the information age, that's cybersecurity. And the company's livelihood, your universities that you work for or that you're enrolled at, all rely on the network being up. And when it's down, if you can't get into your professor's website to drop off your test, it's irritating. So the mission of education, the mission of CSC, the mission of the United States Department of Defense wholly rests on the network, and the network being up, and the information on the network being trusted. So you have to realize cyber is mission assurance. We talked a little bit about insider threat, but insider threats are becoming really the next big thing of how I manage all the data about all the things on the network as I log on, and you follow me around what I'm doing on the network. You develop a pattern of norms, and then you can determine the pattern of what we call abnorms, and go from there and decide, are the things that you want to now constrain or restrain individuals from doing, or cause a flag to go up when somebody does something they shouldn't do. Again, because the risk is so great, this person's already afforded network access. He doesn't have to hack in, or she doesn't have to hack in. So important. Threat information sharing, a huge real-time opportunity here within governments, across governments, within industry, across industry, to be able to note what has happened in real time to determine if this is friend, foe, what it is, and tell your neighbor that, hey, this just happened, please put patches out for this so that you don't get hit too. It's a great opportunity for organizations to sort of get to know each other in a way they never thought they would. But again, there's a common thread out there, and most companies, again, have already been touched at least once. If you had something of value, it has been touched. And then the last thing I want to poke at you is the Internet of Things. On this slide, it does say has upped the ante. Personally, it's challenging for me to get my head around this Internet of Things, and how do I protect it? Somebody hacking into my car, somebody hacking into my elderly neighbor's pacemaker, all those things. If it has an IP address, it can be touched. And so how do you protect all those things? And this is something I hope to get some of your ideas on that, because frankly, it does become a huge challenge. As the world gravitates from IPv4 to IPv6 addresses, all of these things that have chips in them become addressable spaces connected to the internet. Ergo, they become vulnerable where they probably weren't just a few years ago. And so we have to mutually come up with methods that actually reduce this threat and allow us to, the society, to continue to thrive. Next slide, and the last slide. So I like to put this silly equation up here because I was trying to challenge some folks here in that, you know, your cybersecurity value is really a function of X over Y, and X over Y is equal to the ratio of successful attacks over total attacks. And in reality, if you buy something for your network, like any of these things in the boxes, and it alters this ratio, it has value. If it doesn't alter this ratio, I offer it does not have value. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. But at the end of the day, as we move into the mobile space, as we move into cloud, as we access and grind and analyze big data, and you're now trying to protect this ecosystem of information management, the cyber value of where we're willing to spend money has got to alter this equation. You have to drive the ratio to zero. And right now, I don't know too many things that can drive this. I don't even know which of the elements below in the colored boxes drive the investments or drive the ratio closer to zero. Clearly, we would say SIM and data loss prevention software and identity management tools, training. How do I quantify those in a larger algebraic equation so that I know what I've got for my money? So again, a very important yet broadly written equation to get you thinking about what do bosses imagine when you come out and you're a smart graduate of an institution, and what he's looking at is how much for how much. What do I get for what I just spent? And is it having an effect on my business? So with that, let me end there, and the next slide. And you guys can hopefully have asked a few questions, and we can now have a conversation about the questions that you asked. Anything on your mind related to the slides or related to cyber, I will do my best to answer.
All right. Well, thank you very, very much, Rob. That was very interesting and informative. I know I personally learned a lot, as I'm sure all of our viewers did as well. I know we have a couple questions in queue, and I encourage everybody to go onto Twitter and ask your questions. Don't be afraid. Rob's an expert in the field and is excited to get those answered for you as well. So with that, I'll turn it over to Nicole to host the question and answer portion.
Excellent. Thanks, Rob, and thanks, Amanda. Okay, first question for you, Rob. This is an easy one, though. What was your major, and how did you get into cyber?
Well, that's a simple one. So major was civil engineering, and I got into cyber as a result of a move I made in my career, which was about 15 years ago, from the weapons systems development world in the Navy into the information technology world at the request of a mentor of mine. And I questioned, why would I do that? I worked in torpedoes for the Navy, which at the time, during the tail end of the Cold War, was about as sexy a place as you can work. We only needed to ask for money, and dump trucks pulled up and dropped it off for us. And he said, hey, come work and this internet thing is about ready to take off. I need your help. And so I looked at him rather puzzled, and I agreed to go. And he actually said to me, he says, Rob, you know, you're as an engineer, your brain will parse the problems, and you'll be able to lead and solve and do well here. It's not something you can't learn. And apparently it wasn't completely difficult for me, so I've been in it ever since.
So I want to continue that then, because you said you made a critical point. You said it was about some skill sets that you had and not necessarily your degree. Yeah, because that's a big shift from the torpedoes to cybersecurity. But what are some of the critical skills that you need to be in the cyberspace?
So I think, Nicole, the ability to analyze, the ability to question, the ability to sort of parse information with not all the variables for the algebraic equation being present. So you're sort of able to operate with less than perfect information and render recommendations and decisions and go forward to your boss. At the same time, there's obviously a penchant for computers and computer science that is helpful, but I don't think it's necessary. If you have a desire to seek out answers, you have an ability to play in this space. Most of the millennial generation are going to be good at this anyway because they've all had phones. Everybody on this call most likely has a fourth generation smartphone, if not a fifth generation smartphone. So I think that we take for granted what we know, but you can really do apply, if you understand what's going on inside your phone, you can apply those things to a career in cyber. You also have to understand a little bit about software, and you have to understand most of the things today are built with packages. They're not, we're not writing code line by line, bit by bit anymore. Although if you get into forensics and other really explicit areas, you may learn how to do those things. But I think there's I don't know how many skills are necessary. It depends on what you want to do within cybersecurity. But suffice to say, you know, the desire to analyze and succeed can get you a lot of places.
You kind of answered this earlier, but I want to bring it back to the table. It says, where does the responsibility of private firms begin and end in cybersecurity?
That's a really good question. So I think it begins with your moral ethics to protect your business's information, your intellectual property, and if you're doing business on behalf of someone else, their information, right? That's an ethical standard that exists today in business. So you can imagine it goes far enough to sustain what's inside your company as an element of someone else's job. It doesn't extend into somebody else's company, but you can imagine some of the cyber attacks that have occurred hit multiple companies at the same time, and most of the companies in certain industries, say the energy sector, they all know each other. The CISOs all know each other. The guys that run the network operations centers all know each other. So your responsibilities are inside your company's perimeter, if you will, but know full well that they will touch others. And now you'll have to decide what comes in after that attack, because it could come in from a friend and you may suddenly not let it in.
Okay, excellent, thank you. So when you mentioned the Internet of Things and the concerns around that, what are some of the things, because I think from an Internet perspective, it's vast. So what are some of the things that people can start to think critically about with this Internet and just the wide scope of our security being so open and in the cloud?
Well, so I think, Nicole, that the Internet of Things becomes an explosion of the endpoints on the Internet, you know, and I don't know how many things are on the Internet today. It's billions. When I was in Department of Defense, we had 16 or so million devices that were considered endpoints on the Internet. If we move to an IoT, and I try to capture all the things within the Department of Defense that were on the Internet, that number would go up by orders of magnitude. So now, as you're trying to manage something so large, right, you really do have to approach the problem differently. The traditional methods of I'll have a firewall, I'll have this, I'll have that. You must get into behavioral analytics. You must get into big data, because now there's so many things that you're trying to keep track of, and use the computers to track the things and their behavior. The problem shifts to a strategic problem. Which things do you want to manage? Which things don't you want to manage? Can you afford it if some chip in your car that runs the braking system to go bad? Probably not. If it's monitoring the tire pressure in your spare tire, can you afford to let that go? Probably. So you got to make some trade-off decisions how you approach it.
Excellent. Thank you. Okay, last question. What cyber threat concerns you the most?
Well, the threat that concerns me the most is the one I haven't seen yet. right?
Mm.
And remember, the most dangerous threats don't leave footprints, don't leave evidence. They've done their work, and your information is compromised. Um, People equate concerns with things they've seen. It's sort of like walking into your house and you see your house disheveled and somebody broke in and the lock is broken. That would concern you, obviously. What might concern you more is if somebody came in but they didn't touch anything and they now know everything about you. They just didn't leave a trace that occurred. And what concerns me is the threat is advancing itself far better than the defenses are today, right? It is clearly an offensive game that's being played, and the defenses are trying to catch up. So I think that for all the students on the line, again, this is a field that really does have a thirst for knowledge to get ahead of or be equal to the pressure being brought about by attackers. And so that's what keeps me up at night, is we will not be able to sort of find equilibrium soon enough.
Well, that's a pretty big heavy, I think. And that ends the questions that came through. Amanda, would you like to close? First, before we close, we got to do a shout out for some opportunities. So Rob has done a ton of, he's given us a ton of data. Don't forget, Amanda, to send them out to the website too for some opportunities.
Absolutely, most definitely. Well, thank you so much to both Rob and Nicole. Rob especially, I think everyone learned a lot. I know I did, and I'm sure most of the students did as well. We thank everyone that attended today. If you have anyone you want to share this with, or maybe you want to view it again, it will be up on all of our websites as well as on our YouTube site as well. CSC on campus for all of our social media. Thank you all that viewed, and if you are interested in any opportunities at all with CSC, whether internships, full-time opportunities, or just to learn more about the work that CSC does, I'm going to share a final slide. If you have any questions, you can definitely tweet them at us. Thank you so much, and have a great rest of your night, and I'll share that slide right now.
Thanks, Amanda. Thanks, Rob.
Thanks.